Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Sitrep podcast, your forward operations space for all things military and historical wargaming. I am your host, Oriskany Jim, and today we are back for another installment in our ongoing series of wargames and discussions commemorating the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Kursk. Specifically, we'll be wargaming a small slice of what many consider to be the climax of the Battle of Kursk, the epic tank clash at Prokhorovka. As far as the larger operational and historical context for the Battle of Kursk, we've covered that extensively in some recent episodes. Check out these videos if you're interested in this broader context and background. Suffice it to say that the Battle of Kursk is now a week old, and of the two big German pincers set up to slice off the Kursk salient, the northern German attack, that's the 9th Army under General Model, well, they're just done. This force has been resolutely halted by Rokossovsky's Central Front, and in fact, Rokossovsky is already setting up some probing counteroffensives, setting up Operation Kutuzov to attack the German positions in the Orel salient. In the south, however, the situation is very, very different. General Holt's 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Kempf are even now making slow but very steady progress through the successive belts of defenses set up by the Soviet Voronezh Front under General Vatutin. Now, the forwardmost German spearheads are cracking through the very last of these Soviet defensive belts, especially in the eastern sector with the 2nd SS Panzer Corps under General Paul Hauser. In summary, the Soviet commanders watching the situation along the Voronezh Front are starting to get very nervous, and they're about to make a momentous decision. In a word, they're about to change their battle plan, and when the Red Army of 1943 changes their battle plan on the fly in the midst of an ongoing battle, yeah, you can tell they're pretty scared. In the broadest possible terms, the overall Soviet plan for the Battle of Kursk was for General Rokossovsky's Central Front to absorb the northern German attack, General Vatutin's Voronezh Front to absorb the southern German attack, and only when the Germans had completely impaled themselves on the Soviet defenses would the Soviets release a third complete front with about another 500,000 plus men. This would be the Steppe Front under General Ivan Nikitich Konev. This was supposed to be a completely fresh army group hitting German units who were immobile, exposed, exhausted, and bled white. The threatening advance of Hauser's 2nd SS Panzer Corps, however, forced the Soviets to break the piggy bank a little bit, and ahead of schedule commit the 5th Guards Army under General Zhadov and the 5th Guards Tank Army under General Pavel Rutmistrov. So the 5th Guards Tank Army in particular would not be hitting pinned down and exhausted German formations. They would be colliding with the SS Panzer Corps while it was advancing in a head-on battle. This is the overall situation presented in very broad terms that sets up the tank clash at Prokhorovka on 12 July 1943. Now, there's a lot of mythological fog that surrounds this engagement. Let's clear up just a little bit of it here. Number one, although 2nd SS Panzer Corps and 5th Guards Tank Army did fight what is still probably the largest single-field tank engagement in history, the Battle of Prokhorovka was nowhere near as big as most historical records would probably have you believe. Number two, this was not a meeting engagement. This is more of a Soviet hasty attack up against an ad hoc defense line set up by the Germans. And number three, there were no tank collisions. There were no T-34s ramming German Tigers. It just didn't happen. This is a decades-long myth gratefully put to rest. What does happen, however, is the Soviets do charge the Germans because they want to close the engagement ranges as quickly as possible. At engagement ranges like 500 meters or even 200 meters, a Soviet 76mm hits almost as hard as an 88. But if you stretch that engagement range out to near 1,000 meters, the Soviets are basically helpless. So it certainly behooves the Soviet commanders to rush across that killing ground as quickly as they can, while the Germans conversely want to keep those open engagement ranges for as long as possible. This is a dynamic we will absolutely see in today's table. Speaking of which, let's go to the table, kick off this absolutely monster game. We have a 48 square foot table and something like 120, 130 tanks in the game. Let's get it started and see what happens. Here is our table for today's game. I just wanted to note real quick that this map really isn't to scale, it's rather compressed. We have the famous Belgorod-Kharkov Railroad embankment there on the right-hand side of your screen, and the banks of the River Psel there to your upper left. So this diagonal corridor is where the majority of the Battle of Prokhorovka does take place. Just here on our table, it's not really to true line of sight scale. Starting off with some tigers there, let's take a review of some of the units that we'll see featured in today's game. Clearly, we see all kinds of different late model Mark IVs. So we have F2s, Gs, Hs, some with Scherzen, some with not. You guys saw the entire rule set earlier in the video. It literally fits on half a sheet of typing paper, so clearly it's got to be very simple. A Mark IV is a Mark IV, a Mark III is a Mark III, Stugs, mortars, etc. Over here we come to the Soviet side. I should note that by and large we are recreating the forward edge of 18th Tank Corps, and that's why we see all these Churchills here. These Churchills might come as a little bit of a surprise. There was the 36th Independent Heavy Guards Tank Regiment, and yeah, they were completely outfitted for this battle, at least, with Churchills as their heavy tanks. Of course, all kinds of T-34s. Those rings on those T-34s there, those denote which tanks have tank riders on them. Su-85s, Su-152s, and those little guys in front there are T-70 light tanks or proxies. We do have some T-60s and some other models on the table to kind of make up for it. About a third of any Soviet tank brigade in this period was still a light tank, usually T-70s. Here we have some more German Mark IIIs, Stugs, and some additional Tigers, already on the high ground on that railroad berm, ready to cover the right wing of the German position. With the roar of massed tank engines, this game is officially underway. So the turn sequence in this game is absurdly simple. The Soviets are all built out in groups of 5, the Germans are built out in groups of 3. The Soviets were more or less on the offensive during the Battle of Prokhorovka, so they will always go first. They activate 5 of their units. By activate, I mean they either fire twice, move and fire and move. You guys get the idea. And then the Germans reciprocate with 3 of their own units, rinse repeat until everybody has activated. So Marx moved forward with 5 of his Churchills, and what I did was I made this stick with all of the range brackets pre-measured. Also with all the types of guns in the game, with, like, say, the 6-pounders there on those Churchills, that 6 is their chance to hit at that range on a D10. So looks like he scored 3 hits against the 6. None of that intervening wheat field or fences or cows, none of that stuff is going to stop a 6-pounder. So now we look at the penetration number. That's the second number. That was a 7. And what you do is you take that 7, you compare it against the target's armor. In this case, a Mark IV has an armor of 4. That's the second number we see there in that green column. And the difference between those is, again, your chance to penetrate on a D10. So we scored 3 hits. He gets to roll 3 penetration checks. One of them has succeeded with a roll or a 3 or less on a D10, and one Mark IV is now burning. So far, luck has definitely been with the Soviet players. However, this platoon of Martyr tank destroyers has now returned fire and scored 2 kills against those KV-1 heavy tanks there, so good job. There's also a Churchill heavy tank on fire. However, back over on the German side, not only would that first Mark IV get knocked out, a whole platoon of Martyr tank destroyers has been wrecked as well. Okay, no more messing around. Let's start playing with some big toys. We've got a platoon of Tigers hull down behind a railroad berm. They're not moving anywhere. They're going to take a double fire order. Basically, each one of those Tigers is going to shoot twice. So I break out my measuring stick here, make sure I get the right target. There are the T-34s in the open. And that green line is the breakoff point for the range bracket. It's 4 feet, by the way. So we find the 88's number. It's a 7 or less to hit. Tom rolls his first 3 dice. That's going to be 2 hits. The penetration is now 13. Subtract the T-34's armor of 5. Long story short, take your first shot. The chance is 8 to penetrate on his 3 hits. And it looks like he got all 3. All right, it's cool. So that's going to be 3 T-34s burning in the open right off the bat. Welcome to the Eastern Front. Right now, again, this is a double fire order, which means that those Tigers each get to shoot again. And it looks like he got another bunch of hits. Now he just has to penetrate the armor. Now here, the Russians get a little bit more lucky with the armor. Only 1 penetration value succeeds. So he knocked out 3 with the first salvo, and second salvo, he picked off 1 more. That's going to be 4 T-34s burning in the open under long-range Tiger fire. A little bit later in the turn sequence, the Germans are going to take another round of fire from this platoon of Mark IVs. They are targeting the Su-76 assault guns you see there at the end of the stick. The chance to hit at this range is a 7. Looks like Mike has scored 2 hits. Now the penetration is going to be kind of a joke. The Germans have an 11. The armor on those Su-76s is only a 2. You see how they're not even enclosed, and they basically have aluminum siding for armor. So 11 minus 2 equals a 9 net chance on a D10 to penetrate, but wouldn't you know it, Mike still manages to roll a 10, so one of those Su-76s are just the luckiest guys in the Red Army today. Switching over to a Soviet activation, what we're seeing is John is rushing forward with a half company of his T-34s and opening an immediate fire on that battery of Stugs we see there at the end of his measuring stick. So the general idea for the Soviets is simply going to be to close the range as quickly as possible. At short range, Soviet guns aren't that bad, but at long range, German guns are just too good. In a long range shootout, the Germans will shoot the Soviets to bits. So at shorter range, he scored some hits. Now he's going to try and penetrate. And even with a penetration of only 8 versus the Stugs armor of 5, that leaves you with a 3 on a D10, he scores 3 penetrations. So that whole battery of Stugs is smoked. Soviet Su-85 assault guns have taken the high ground, and they're going to open what is for them long-range fire on those Tigers tucked back behind that railroad berm by the Prokhorovka railroad station. So we clearly find that we're in this general range bracket here. We just have to find the values for a Soviet 85mm gun. 7 to hit. So we're going to give the Germans a +2 bonus on that because they're hull down behind that railroad berm. And Soviet dice finally slow down a little bit. Everything's missed. Over here on the western end of the table, Mark's going to get a little aggressive with his somewhat expendable T-70 light tanks. Gotta remember, at this phase of the war, at least a third of most Soviet tank brigades were made up of light tanks like the T-70. So he's moved forward. That half company will only get a single volley. He's engaging those German mortars behind the light German fieldworks. That will give him a +2 on his difficulty. He does score 2 hits, and it's only a 45mm gun, but it's only mortar armor, which is just as bad as Su-76s that we saw earlier. Blow up all over the place. Alright, so no penetrations were scored. The Germans got lucky. However, the Soviets have taken that objective. Looks like a platoon of German Mark IVs is going to take return fire against those T-70s. That doesn't really seem fair, but hey, the Eastern Front is a cruel place. There are the tanks that are going to be shooting, and looks like it's going to be a 7 to hit and 11 to penetrate at this range. This is a double fire order, so all 3 of those Mark IVs get to shoot twice, 6 total dice against a 7. We've got 1 slightly cocked dice, so Mike's going to go ahead and re-roll that. Alright, looks like Mike has scored 4 hits. Now it comes to penetration, and here's where it gets kind of sad. Like we saw, the penetration at this range is 11 versus the T-70's armor value of 3. They really were miserable little tanks. 11 minus 3 is 8 on a D10. Alright, looks like he scored 3 penetrations and thus 3 kills. Long story short, take your second shot. 3 of those T-70s are out of gas. Meanwhile, to the east, John's battery of Su-152s, yes, battery of Su-152s. It looks like they're trying to push that mountain out of the way. They might actually pull it off. Panning out a little bit, we get a broader view of the table where we see plenty of tanks are already getting kind of crispy. Over here to the southeast, we see where Tom is moving forward with one of his platoons of Mark III tanks. Yeah, unfortunately for the Germans, the Mark III was still in pretty widespread use at the Battle of Kursk. It really is too small of a tank for the Eastern Front by this point of the war. Even with their upgraded L-60 5cm guns, yeah, their chance to hit and their chance to penetrate we see here on the stick is only a 7 to hit and a 7 to penetrate. They only get to shoot once because they moved, but Tom does manage to land a hit. Now he's got to penetrate though, and the sloped armor on that T-34 is pretty tough. 7 minus 5, he needs a 2, but he does get it, and against the odds, one of those T-34s is burning. Later on in the turn, Tom's moving forward with a platoon of Mark IV tanks. He's going to belly up right against that railroad berm, so he gets the protection of the berm, but he doesn't have to pay for shooting across it. And he's going to target those Su-85s that are sitting on the high ground. Against the 7 at this range, he gets 1 hit. Alright, so his penetration is an 11. That sloped armor on those Su-85s does give him a 5, so he's going to have to roll a 6 or less to score a hit, but with a 9, he doesn't get it. Those Su-85s are safe for now. Over here on the western end of the table, we see where Mark has lost his entire front rank of KV-1 heavy tanks, and now that second rank is going to take a double fire order against some of this German armor clear on the other end of the table. So Soviet accuracy at long range is really bad. He only has a 3 to hit at this range. In fact, we have to subtract 2 from that because he has to shoot through his own tanks. So it becomes a 1, but hey, even with a 1 chance, he scores 3 hits. Now he's got to penetrate against the 1, and he doesn't get any this time. Soviet guns at long range really are terrible. Mike is beginning a tentative advance with his Germans over here on the west side of the table. Looks like he's moving forward with that platoon of Martyr tank destroyers, and he's going to try to engage and mop up the rest of these T-70s that are sort of screening the Soviet right wing. Alright, so we have a 7 to hit and 11 to penetrate. We're going to run across that number a lot. It's medium range for the most common type of German gun on the table. So out of 7s to hit, looks like he gets 2 hits. He only gets to shoot once because this is a move and fire order. Now here comes the penetration. It's 11 to penetrate, and the armor is only a 3 if we look up the T-70 there on its armor table over there to the right. So he has a net 8 to penetrate on a D10, and oh man, look at this. Mike's dice continue to fail him. Those are some of the luckiest T-70s in the Red Army. Looks like Mike wants to take out some of his frustrations with some 88 fire off of his Tigers against these Churchills clear across the battlefield. Now, obviously, the 88 is by far the most powerful German gun on the table. However, he's targeting Churchills, and those Churchills are absurdly well armored. They're very, very thick-skinned. The 88, even at this range, has a 7 chance to hit. It's a double fire order, which means each tank gets to shoot twice, and he's got 3 hits. Okay, that was probably the easy part. Now he's got to penetrate. Yes, it is an 88, but it's against Churchills, and again, it's clear across the table. So it's 13 minus the Churchill's armor of 7 equals a 6 chance to penetrate. And it looks like he got 2 penetrations. So, again, 88s, man. Despite the range, despite the armor, we are going to set 2 of these Churchills on fire and continue to chisel away at the 36th Independent Heavy Tank Regiment. Looks like Mike wants to continue to chew away at this merciless phalanx of Lend-Lease Churchills in the center of the table, so he's going to take a double fire order with a platoon of Mark IVs. Okay, so Mark IVs armed with 75mm guns versus the Tiger's 88s. Clearly, the 75 is a weaker gun, but he gets actually a better roll for his chance to hit here, and those 75s have actually scored more hits than the 88s did. Go figure. But now comes penetration. The penetration for the 7.5 centimeter gun at this range is only an 11, minus the 7 Churchill armor gives a chance of 4 on a D10. But he does actually score a success, and another one of those Churchills is now burning. That actually kind of tracks. The Tigers fired and killed 2 Churchills. The smaller Mark IVs fired and killed 1. We're now beginning turn 2, and for the first activation, it looks like John is going to be firing his Su-85 assault guns off that high ground down against those Stug assault guns that are partially behind those railroad tracks. Again, like I said, the Soviets are always going to get the first activation because they were pretty much on the offensive here at Prokhorovka. And now John has to kind of fire each of his Su-85s in turn because it's going to get a little complicated. Some of the Stugs are behind the railroad tracks, some of them aren't, so there's different chances to hit. We have to kind of tiptoe through the firing sequence with a little bit of extra care. But even with the partial cover, looks like those Stugs are pretty much deleted. Yeah, those Su-85s are probably the best pure anti-tank gun the Soviets have. The Su-152s are scary, but it's a low-velocity HE gun. Those Su-85s are dedicated tank killers, as we see. In retaliation, the Germans are going to take a double fire order with those Tigers. No, they're not going to move. Tigers don't have to move. You're not going to outrun their 88. And it looks like they're still going to wail on those Churchills. So, like we saw last turn, the chance to hit for an 88 at this range is a 7, double fire order, each tank shoots twice out of 6 dice. Actually, Mike finally catches a break here. He scores 5 hits. Now he has to penetrate. It's 13 penetration against the Churchill's armor rating of 7, which along with the Tiger 7 and the SU-152 7 are the best armor ratings in the game. He scores 3 penetrations. He's only going to kill 2 of those Churchills here, again, because we're enforcing platoon or half company fire versus platoon half company targets. So, long story short, take your third shot. He pretty much killed one of those Churchills twice. Now, why is he paying so much attention to those Churchills? You see where some Panzer Grenadiers have advanced and taken that barn in the center of the table. That's an objective point that the Germans have taken, and now they're trying to protect it. Now John is going to get pretty aggressive with some of his T-34s here on the extreme eastern edge of the table. So what he's doing is he is sort of mounting this berm on which the Belgorod-Kharkov rail line was built. Historically, this rail line was built on a pretty steep berm. It was a pretty significant terrain feature on the battlefield that we're trying to represent here on our table. So the T-34 has a movement of 18 inches. Getting on that high ground is going to cost him a little bit of a penalty. Nevertheless, he's gotten into position, and what he's really trying to do here is, again, the Soviets have to get close. He took a single fire order. Now that back one did have to take a little bit of a penalty there because he is having to shoot through his comrades. But they have taken out that whole platoon of Mark IVs in one go. Now, I'm not sure what those Mark IIIs are going to do. They might turn turrets and immediately counter-engage those T-34s. Sure enough, Tom gives the order, and those Mark IIIs are going to engage. They're at less than a foot, some of them, to immediately, go after those T-34s. On a double fire order, cool, he's got quite a few hits there, and the penetration for an L-65cm gun at this range is a 10 minus 5 for the T-34's armor equals a net of 5 chance on a D10 to kill a T-34. And boom, looks like he got 2 penetrations. So that's going to be 2 of those T-34s smoked. So in about 3 minutes, we have killed 5 tanks, and that's the kind of play speed this system is going for. Immediately after that, John's T-70 light tanks jump up on some of this high ground and open fire into some Mark IIIs. Again, at close range, Soviet guns aren't bad, especially against later German vehicles. And with some good die rolling, he managed to knock out 2 of those Mark IIIs. However, that just means that another platoon of Mark IIIs immediately moves into position and counter-engages those same T-70s. By the way, that hill is going to be a rough approximation of Hill 241 and Hill 252. Again, this table is very compressed geographically. So we measure the range. Looks like a 5cm gun is going to hit on an 8. So that's going to be an 8 chance to hit on a D10. 9 is going to be the penetration. So the penetration is not going to be tough. It is 9 minus 3 for the T-70's armor, 6 on a D10. Boom, and looks like 3 successes. So that's going to be 3 of those T-70s now burning on that high ground. The Soviets do still hold that objective point, however. Looks like John really wants that high ground. He uses a double movement order to rush another half company of T-34s with tank riders, those little rings there, up onto that railroad berm. He can kind of do that because those Mark IVs are burning and those Mark IIIs have already fired. Tom, however, decides to counter the move by pivoting another platoon of Mark IVs and taking a long-range single fire order up here against the T-34s. Now, it's kind of a long-range shot and he has to shoot through the cover of that berm, but long-range tank fire is what German tanks are good at. That was one of their big advantages through most of the war. He does score 2 hits, however, none of them penetrate. Nevertheless, there is a rule in this game that any Soviet tank that takes a hit does lose any tank riders, whether it penetrates the armor or not. So even though he didn't get through the armor, Tom still managed to kill 2 Soviet units. Meanwhile, the rest of this Soviet T-34 medium tank company is going to roll up past the burning remnants of their comrades, and what they're going to do is take a single fire order on some of the Stugs behind light German field works. And the Germans at Prokhorovka did have slight field fortifications, just not very much. So he scored 2 hits on that Stug, 1 managed to penetrate, so he's taken out. And what's going to happen now is the remaining 2 Stugs are going to return fire with an immediate double fire order. They're not moving, so they get to shoot twice. So it's going to be 4 hits for 2 Stugs, chance of 8 at this range, and Tom has scored all 4 hits. good to go. Now to penetrate. A Stug penetrates on a 12 at this range, minus T-34's armor of 5. That's going to be a chance of 7. Sweet, he has scored 2 penetrations. Now again, all of those Soviet tanks are carrying tank riders. It's an incredibly risky tactic, and John has not dismounted them. So even though only 2 Soviet T-34s are on fire, Tom scored 4 hits. So that's going to be 4 Soviet infantry squads taken out. Coming up on the end of turn 2, we are seeing the Germans particularly having taken a terrible pounding on their right. Conversely, on their left, they're practically cherry. Everything burning for the Germans is on the other side of the table. Meanwhile, that whole front rank of KVs is gone. Looks like the majority of the Churchills are gone. Yep, 6 out of 10 of the Churchills are gone. However, be warned, here comes that gigantic battery of Su-152 assault guns. Those things are scary, let me tell you. Here come the Tigers rolling forward from their hull-down positions behind the railroad line, and what Tom seems to be doing here is trying to engage some of John's T-34s that have taken the high ground further up the rail line. The Soviets are really taking a lot of the high ground here on the eastern end of the table. Looks like John is trying to set up a good firing position from which he can rain down all kinds of hate and discontent all over the German right wing. The Tigers, though, have something to say about that. Now, one factor we're going to have to take into consideration is that while those 2 Tigers in front have no problem, the one in back is going to suffer a penalty to hit because he has to shoot through his comrades. The Soviets are almost getting a cover bonus for the Tigers that are somewhat blocking the shot here. Again, this table is very, very compressed. This game is not true line of sight. We are allowing tanks to shoot through each other. They just have to take a penalty to do so. So 13 penetration minus 5 for the T-34's armor equals an 8 chance to penetrate. Yep, looks like we're going to be burning some more T-34s. So we've had a bit of a rapid-fire tank dogfight over there on the eastern end of the table between Tom's Germans and John's Soviets. They've used up most of their activations, though, so that part of the battlefield is going to more or less fall silent. We head back over here to Mark's Soviets versus Mike's Germans. So the first thing Mark's going to do here is roll forward with the remnants of his Su-76 assault guns and single-fire engage these Mark IVs. Again, at close range, Soviet tank guns are pretty good. The closer they get, the better they do. And sure enough, looks like he scored hits and penetrations on 2 more German Mark IV tanks. Alright guys, there we are so far. I hope by now the sheer scale of the engagement at Prokhorovka is starting to come into focus. And again, we're only doing a tiny sliver of the historical engagement. And I hope it's also becoming clear why the Soviets wanted to close the distance so quickly and engage the Germans at the shortest possible range as quickly as they possibly could. The way I drew up these charts, intentionally so, was for most Soviet units to only really have a prayer of penetrating most German tanks at a range of 4 feet, really only 2 feet, here on our 15mm table. How is this all going to shake out? Well, you're going to have to please watch this space, come back later this week for part 2 of this episode, and see how this battle wraps up. So that's where we're going to leave it for now. Thanks very much for watching. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Please remember to hit that notification bell. Also, please consider joining the Sitrep Podcast Discord. There is an auto-accept invitation link to our Discord in the description of this video. Hit the link, join the community, see what everybody's up to, and best of all, show us what's happening on your hobby table. But for now, we are rounds complete for another episode. I am your host, Jim, and as always, Tango Mike for watching.